I was always drawn to places where silence reigned. As a kid, I'd slip away to the creek that curled around the outskirts of town, mesmerized by the way the water danced over the rocks, its steady rhythm calming the restless energy that constantly churned inside me. That quiet stream became my retreat, a place where I could sit for hours, letting my thoughts drift as effortlessly as the current itself. Those moments alone taught me something invaluable. Stillness wasn't empty. It carried its own kind of strength. That lesson stayed with me well into adulthood. My teenage years were a strange mix of contradictions. I was the kid teachers praised for top grades, but also the one who'd vanish from school to wander through abandoned buildings with my friends, chasing the thrill of rebellion. There was an undeniable satisfaction in defying expectations, but I always knew I was walking a fine line. I had to find a way to balance the reckless explorer and the dedicated student because, in the end, I didn't want to disappoint anyone, least of all myself. As I grew older, I found a different kind of escape in books and long drives through the countryside. There was something about an open road that echoed the uncertainty of my own life. Every twist and turn hinted at endless possibilities, always just out of reach. I didn't know exactly what I was chasing, but I knew I wanted more than a life of predictability. My thoughts often circled back to the idea of purpose. Was it about achieving milestones, degrees, promotions, a picture-perfect house? Or was it something less tangible, something woven into the way we treated people, the fleeting moments we created, the quiet contentment of a life well lived? These weren't questions born out of any single event. They came from a restless need to understand what made life truly meaningful. And for years, I wrestled with that question, long before I realized how my own choices would shape the answer. Those reflections lingered with me as the years passed, and life, in its own way, provided answers in the most unexpected moments, sometimes in instances that seemed insignificant but later proved pivotal. I had come to believe that relationships, whether bound by blood or built through experience, were the foundation of everything that mattered. But no bond, no matter how strong, was immune to time or the weight of betrayal. Today, my daughter, Rachel, came to visit. The encounter was tense, heavy with unspoken words neither of us knew how to bridge. She carried herself with the same grace and composure she always had, but the years that had passed between us had built walls too high to be torn down in a single conversation. She spoke with a quiet intensity, her voice steady yet filled with longing, but in the end, she left without the response she had been hoping for. She wanted to mend what had been broken. I told her I'd think about it. But the moment she walked out the door, the weight of it all collapsed over me, and I found myself breaking down in tears. Rachel is a mother now, with children of her own, but no matter how many years pass, I still see the little girl I once held in my arms. She's sharp, articulate, and, if her sister is to be believed, a devoted wife and mother. I don't doubt it. She's just like her mother. Strong-willed, determined, stubborn, even. In every way, she's the kind of daughter any parent would be proud of. So why have I let 5 years pass without speaking to her? The answer is simple. Her mother. I can still hear the last words I said to Rachel as if they were carved into my memory. 5 years ago, at Laura's funeral, consumed by grief and anger, I turned to my daughter at the graveside and, with clenched fists and a voice shaking with fury, told her she was as dead to me as the woman we had just buried. I said the same to my son, Ethan. And by the time I walked away, there wasn't a single person there who didn't understand that my words extended to them all. The stunned silence, the looks of disbelief, it still haunts me. But that pain was mine alone to carry. It wasn't just about losing my wife. It was about the complete and utter collapse of my family. That day, I left with only one person at my side, my youngest, Olivia. When I met Laura, I had been captivated from the very start. We were inseparable, as if we had been created for each other. By the time we were married, people used to joke that we already had the habits of an old married couple. We spent 25 years together, years I had believed were solid, unshakable. And then, something changed. Something I still can't fully grasp. Our anniversary celebration had been a grand affair. More than 200 people gathered under a sprawling tent, eating, laughing, and dancing well into the night. Friends, family, even the mayor had been there. When Laura and I stood together, renewing our vows, I doubt there was a dry eye in the crowd. We weren't immune to it either. In that moment, my world had narrowed down to just one person. I hadn't noticed our children standing beside us at the altar or the family in the front row. I hadn't even seen Bo, our dog, lying at the preacher's feet. All I saw was her. Rachel had just returned from her honeymoon. Ethan was deep into his second year of college, and Olivia was only beginning hers. Having the whole family together again felt like everything had fallen perfectly into place. And for a while, it seemed as though life was continuing as it always had. A few days later, while returning some rental equipment, I had a minor accident, backed my truck into a brand new Lexus. An officer arrived to handle the situation, and to my surprise, it was Jason, a kid I remembered watching play baseball with Ethan back in the day. Now, he stood before me as a grown man, confident, sure of himself. We exchanged pleasantries, small talk, until he said something that lodged itself in my mind. "Sorry, I missed your anniversary," he said. "My folks said it was a hell of a party." I shook his hand, still picturing the scrawny boy who used to get thrown out every time he tried to steal second base. He grinned and added, "Tell Mrs. Carter to slow down next time. If she keeps running lights, I might not be so lenient." His words didn't make sense. I must have looked confused because he hesitated, realizing he had said something he shouldn't have. "Ah, never mind," he muttered. "I didn't mean to let that slip." I brushed it off with a laugh. "No worries. Laura doesn't always tell me when she gets a ticket. She thinks I'd threatened to take her license away." I smirked. I let her believe it, though. Keeps her on her toes. Jason nodded, but there was something in his expression, something that felt off. "Yeah, well, a couple of weeks back, she ran a stop sign near the Holiday Inn," Jason said, shaking his head. "I didn't ticket her, but I did tell her to slow down." I frowned. "That was on a Saturday? The 31st? Yeah, that was the same day I'd spent with my father, trying to convince him to move into a nursing home. Laura had told me she was home reading. I wanted to believe there was some mistake, that Jason had gotten the date wrong. Laura wouldn't lie to me. She wouldn't. A month later, my sister called, frantic. She had found my father collapsed on the kitchen floor after a fall. I decided to spend the day with him, hoping to persuade him again to move. Ethan and Olivia came along, but Laura stayed behind, eager for her quiet day with her book. During the drive to my dad's, Ethan couldn't stop talking about a girl he'd met at college, while Olivia insisted boys weren't even on her radar. As the conversation shifted, I found myself telling them the story of how Laura and I met. When we arrived, Dad was in good spirits. The kids spent time with him, and we all had breakfast. By noon, he'd fallen asleep in his chair. "I'm going to take down that dead tree out back," I said. "You two stay with Grandpa." I started to drive home, but, without thinking, I veered toward the Holiday Inn. And there it was, Laura's silver Camry. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, but I knew there was only one Camry in town with that license plate, Con Woman. I called the house. No answer. I dialed her cell. She answered cheerfully. "Hey, how's it going?" I lied, the words slipping out like a second skin. "Just picking up some groceries for Dad." "Where are you?" "Oh, I finished my book and then went shopping." "You don't mind, do you?" I hesitated. "Just don't blow the kids' college fund," I joked, forcing a smile into my voice. "When will you be home?" "Around 6, she said. "Want me to make dinner?" "No, I'm not feeling great. I might stay with Dad tonight." There was a brief pause before she said, "Okay, let me know." I hesitated one last time. "Did you go alone?" "I'm driving," she replied quickly. "By myself." "Just be careful," I said. "And don't let Jason catch you running that stop sign again." There was a beat of silence. "Bye," I said, hanging up. I sat there in my truck, staring at her car. My mind raced, the silence of the parking lot swallowing me up. Then I heard it. A scream. I jerked my head toward the sound. Nothing. The lot was empty, still. A police car rolled in, and Jason stepped out. He walked over, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter, did you call emergency services?" he asked. "No," I replied. "Someone reported a possible break-in." Jason glanced at the hotel. "I'll check with the manager." Before he left, I stopped him. "Can you do me a favor? Ask if Laura's inside. If she is, I want to know who she's with." Jason's face shifted. There was something in his eyes, something I didn't like. Sure." He went inside. I sat there, trying to breathe, my heart pounding. Minutes passed, and then I heard sirens. An ambulance. The paramedics rushed in. I watched, frozen, as they wheeled someone out. It took me a moment to realize it was Laura. Jason returned, his face darker than before. He didn't even need to speak. I already knew. "I'm really sorry, Mr. Carter," he said quietly. "Your wife, she's being taken to the county hospital." I barely heard him. My world had narrowed to a single point, the silence in my ears deafening. "She tried to escape through a sliding door," he continued. "It didn't break, but she got hurt. Badly. Near her eye. She was hysterical." "Who was she with?" I demanded, though the words came out strangled. Jason hesitated, then spoke, his tone reluctant. "I have his name and statement, but I can't give it to you. You'll have to file a request at the station." I stared at him, anger boiling in my gut. "I always thought you and Mrs. Carter were solid," Jason added, holding out his hand. I didn't take it. The tears didn't come right away, not until he left. I don't remember the drive back to my father's house. I remember only the emptiness, the void that surrounded me. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't get out. I just sat there, staring straight ahead. Olivia saw me first. She ran out to me, her face full of worry. "Dad, what happened?" I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, choking me. "Dad, talk to me." Her voice cracked. Ethan came outside, his face full of confusion. "Your mother's in the hospital," I choked out. "Go to her." I tossed Ethan the car keys. "I'm not going." They both looked at me with confusion, but they left. I checked on Dad to make sure he was okay, and then collapsed onto the couch. My heart was pounding. I stared blankly at the floor, trying to gather my thoughts, but they kept slipping away. My eyes burned, and soon the tears flowed freely. I didn't hear Dad wheel himself into the room. He stopped beside me, his eyes soft and gentle. "What's going on, Daniel?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. My chest felt tight, like there was something lodged in it I couldn't get out. Dad had never been one to talk about emotions. When I was growing up, whenever things got tough, he'd tell me to be a man, that everything would work out. I expected him to say the same now. But instead, he surprised me. "Let me tell you something about your mother and me," he said softly. "Something I've never told anyone." I looked at him. My curiosity piqued despite everything. "After you were born." "I messed up," he said. "I stole from work." I blinked. "What?" "I wanted to buy your mom this expensive red dress, and I didn't have the money. So, I took a tool from work and sold it," he explained, his voice distant as if reliving it. "I got caught. I had to pay it back, but they fired me. The cops got involved. It was the worst part of my life." He paused, shaking his head. "Your mom was furious. I almost lost her." He looked at me, his eyes softening. "But one day, she came home with a job lead for me. She told me to go to the interview the next morning. And then she hugged me and said, 'I forgive you.'" He met my gaze. She forgave me. She let go of her pride, and I've never forgotten that. From that moment on, I did everything I could to be the man she could be proud of. His hand, cold and firm, settled over mine. "Daniel, I don't know what's happened here, but maybe you need forgiveness, or maybe you need to forgive. Either way, you'll figure it out. I believe in you. I'm proud of the man you've become." He bowed his head, offering a silent prayer, then wheeled himself out of the room. I stayed on the couch, the phone ringing over and over throughout the night, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I just lay there, listening to the steady hum of crickets outside, the hours dragging by, each one heavier than the last. The next morning, I made breakfast for Dad and then stepped outside, hoping a breath of fresh air would help clear my head. I grabbed the old moped and drove without any real direction, letting my mind wander aimlessly. Around noon, I felt a soft hand on my shoulder. "Dad, are you okay?" It was Olivia. She sat beside me and wrapped her arms around my neck, just like she used to when she was little. We sat together, both of us quietly crying. After a while, Olivia spoke up. "Mom's going to be fine physically," she said, her voice gentle. "She's got a concussion, stitches, a broken nose, and bruises. But emotionally, she's falling apart. The doctors have her on something to help calm her down, but she keeps waking up screaming your name." I shut my eyes, trying to shut out her words. "Dad?" I felt my anger rise again. I was so angry with her. I told her I hated her, I admitted, my voice a harsh whisper. I snapped. "Never say that," I told her. "Your mom loves you. She made a terrible mistake, but that doesn't mean we stop loving her." There was a long silence before Olivia spoke again. "She cheated on you, Dad. She lied to all of us. Does she still deserve our love?" I took a deep breath, my mind a jumbled mess. "She's your mother, Olivia. What she did doesn't change that." "But what about you?" Olivia pressed, her her voice soft but insistent. Do you still love her? I didn't have an answer. My mind was spinning, a whirlwind of confusion. I don't know, I admitted, my voice heavy. I need time. I'm still in shock. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do right now. Olivia hugged me tighter, holding me close. I'm here for you, no matter what. You don't have to go through this alone. I love you. We cried together, sitting in silence, watching a hummingbird flutter between the hollyhocks. I spent the rest of the weekend with Dad, avoiding Laura's calls. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, to face her. On Monday, I called into work and took a few days off. I was drowning in sorrow, and Olivia stayed close, her concern evident in her every glance. The days passed in a haze, filled with constant thoughts of my life with Laura. No marriage is perfect, but ours had been mostly good. Now, the weight of her betrayal felt like something I couldn't bear. I didn't need to know all the details. It was too much to process. Olivia brought me lunch, but I couldn't bring myself to eat. 2 days had passed, and still, there were no answers. Then, a voice broke through my thoughts. Hi, Daniel. I didn't look up. Hi, Laura. She sat down across from me, her hands trembling. One hand was bruised, the other wrapped in a thick bandage. I'm sorry, Daniel, she said softly, her voice unreadable. Her hands, one strong and graceful, now looked battered. One hand was badly bruised, the other covered in bandages. When I looked at her face, my heart sank. Her nose was swollen, held together by thick bandages, and a large gauze pad covered one eye, hiding the stitches. The other eye was dark, swollen with a terrible bruise. She looked like a wreck. As Olivia had put it, she looked broken. She used to be beautiful, but now, everything felt shattered. Whether it was her or my own heartbreak, I wasn't sure. Daniel, I came to apologize, she said quietly. I know it won't fix anything, but it's all I can offer. Rachel brought me here because I couldn't drive myself. I needed to see you, to explain what I did to you to us. I didn't respond. I messed up, not you. You didn't deserve this, she continued, her voice breaking. No matter how much I hurt you, the pain I feel is worse. I've only hurt myself, and I may have destroyed the most important thing in my life. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my composure. Daniel, I need to explain, and maybe, she started, her voice tentative. No, I cut her off, my tone sharp. I don't want to hear it. Please, she pleaded, her voice shaking. If you listen, maybe you'll find a way to forgive me. I don't want to forgive you, I said coldly, my voice like ice. I don't want to lose you, Daniel, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I love you. You need to understand why I did this, why I was weak. My fist clenched, anger boiling up inside me. It all started, she began. No, I shouted, my patience snapping. I don't want to hear it, Laura. Not now. But Daniel, you have to, she insisted desperately. We can fix this. We can be a family again. Please, Daniel, just listen, she begged, her voice trembling with emotion. I stared at her, my body shaking with fury. My hands were clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. No, I said, my voice final, unwavering. I'm done. Without another word, I walked out, leaving her sobbing, her face buried in her hands. As I headed for the kitchen, Rachel stepped in front of me. Dad, you need to listen to her. She needs to apologize. You can't just shut her out. I turned toward her, my voice raw and filled with a force I didn't know I had. Rachel, if you think listening to her excuses will fix this, you're wrong. If she needs to ease her conscience, she can write it down. I'm not going to sit here and listen to why she destroyed a 25-year marriage. I'm not strong enough to forgive her right now. I walked out, not knowing where I was going or when I'd come back. I didn't cry much during the drive. The tears had already been shed. Now, I just needed space to think. The following day, when I returned to Dad's place, Olivia greeted me with a warm hug and a smile. It was exactly what I needed. In the midst of everything falling apart, her embrace reminded me that there could still be moments of comfort. Maybe someday, in some distant future, I'd find a way back to a sense of peace. But there was one thing Laura hadn't made clear, how deeply my actions had affected everyone around me. Dad, for one, was genuinely relieved to have me there. Over dinner that night, I made my intentions clear. I'm going to stay here for a while, I told him. I need some space. You could also use some help around here. And let's be real, I've had enough of your cooking. Someone needs to save you from all those burnt meals. He laughed, but I could see the relief in his eyes. I turned to Olivia next. Can you grab a few things from the house for me? I just can't go back there while she's still living there. And keep it simple. Just say that we broke up. No details. Sure, Dad, she said, nodding. Want me to talk to Mom? Just tell her I'm staying here. And don't let her call me, I said. I'll get in touch when I'm ready. I handed her a list of what I needed, and later that evening, when we talked about the new living arrangement, I could tell Dad was more than happy to have me with him. We avoided the topic of Laura entirely. Instead, we spent the evening playing checkers, a simple routine from years ago. He won, of course. When Olivia returned with my things, I realized she'd packed more than I expected. I grabbed a few things of mine, too, she said, without hesitation. I'll stay in the guest room until school starts. She was quiet, but the expression on her face was sharp. Later, when we were alone, I asked her what had happened during her visit to the house. Olivia's face twisted with anger. Can you believe what Rachel said to me? She told me you were being petty and that you should just go back to Mom. Ethan said the same thing. He said everyone cheats eventually, so we should just forgive her and move on. I stared at her. He said what? Yeah, she shot back. He said you should just let it go. That you should go home and forgive her. And if you want, get yourself a girlfriend. He's just acting like it doesn't matter. Can you believe that? I was speechless. I can't believe it. Yeah, neither can I, Olivia said, her voice tight with frustration. Dad, you didn't do anything wrong. Mom's the one who destroyed everything. She doesn't deserve forgiveness, and that's why I'm here. I could see the fury in her eyes, and I knew better than to try and argue when she was this upset. So I just let her words burn through the silence. For the next couple of months, I tried to keep life as normal as possible. I went to work, helped Dad around the house, and even taught Olivia how to make lasagna, which she didn't appreciate nearly as much as I thought she would. Rachel and Ethan called regularly, asking when I'd return. Each time, I answered the same way. I'm staying here with Dad. I don't want to talk to Mom. Please don't bring her up. They'd try to argue, but I'd end the conversation. Then, one day, Ethan appeared at the door. Dad, we need to talk. It's really important. We stepped outside, and he sat on the patio across from me. Dad, you need to come home. Now. I sighed, struggling to find the right words. Ethan, I began, but he interrupted, his voice sharp with frustration. It's been 2 months, he said, pacing back and forth. Mom's not doing any better. I'm going back to college soon, and I can't leave Rachel alone with her. I stayed silent, watching him as he continued. She's not getting better, Dad. She cries all the time. She won't eat. She won't sleep. She's lost so much weight. We've tried everything, taking her out, getting her to eat, but nothing works. Ethan stopped, his eyes pleading with me. Dad, we can't just leave her like this. You need to let go of your anger. She's hurting too, and it's hurting everyone around her. You need to come home. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Dad, Ethan said again, his voice full of emotion, we need you. She needs you. I looked at him, the kid I raised, the kid I thought I knew, and realized that in some ways, he had changed. He was willing to excuse her actions as if they didn't matter. Ethan, I said coldly, finally finding my voice. You're a grown man now, so I'm going to speak to you like one. Get out of my house. He froze, shock written all over his face. Dad, how can you? Get out, I said, louder this time. You think what she did was okay? You've changed, and not for the better. Take care of her, but don't expect me to join in on your delusions. You need to leave. His face turned pale, and he stood there for a moment, staring at me, before turning and walking out. I heard his car leave a few minutes later, but I didn't feel the relief I expected. I felt nothing. By the time August came around, Olivia returned to college. I hadn't heard from Rachel or Ethan, probably because Ethan had gone back to school and Rachel had found ways to stay busy. They didn't reach out, and I didn't try to reach them. It was just me and Dad now, alone in our shared space. In mid-September, I received a letter from Laura. I tried to open the letter, but the emotions hit me like a freight train. I couldn't bring myself to read it. Instead, I shoved it back into the envelope and buried it in my drawer. I told Rachel that if Laura wanted to make things right, she should write it all down. But now that the letter was in my hands, I couldn't face it. The wound was still far too fresh. Instead, I kept busy, clinging to the routines that gave me some semblance of normality. Olivia checked in frequently, always asking how I was and how Dad was doing. She also mentioned that Rachel and Ethan were doing the same for Laura. Olivia told me she planned to visit in October for my birthday, though her words were more of a command than a suggestion. Being stuck in this rut isn't helping anyone, she said once. We'll talk when I'm ready, I replied, not yet prepared for any deep conversations. October 30th came around, and I hit 50, an age I had been dreading. That morning, Olivia showed up with a wide grin on her face. I'm taking you and Grandpa out for a real Italian dinner. Time you taste the lasagna I've been bragging about. I couldn't help but smile at her teasing about my cooking skills. It felt like the first genuine smile I'd had in months. After dinner, we came home late. I helped Dad get settled in for bed, then joined Olivia in the living room for a drink. So, Dad, she asked, blunt as ever, what have you decided? I sighed deeply. I don't have all the answers. I don't understand why she did what she did, and I've realized that refusing to talk to her won't change anything. I've read her letter. I'm not sure I believe all of it, but maybe some of it's true. I paused, running my hands through my hair. I just don't know how someone could be that careless. Olivia listened intently, her gaze fixed on me. And I know now that reconciliation might be out of reach, I continued. But I'm going to sit down with her. Maybe we'll find some understanding, maybe not. But she deserves to explain herself, and I need her to know how I feel. I stopped for a moment, my chest tight with unresolved feelings. If, after all that, I still can't believe her, I'll have no choice but to file for divorce. I can't keep living like this. I've been just as miserable as she is, from what you've told me. So, as difficult as it is, I'm going to see her and figure out where we stand. I let out a slow breath. I'll call her tomorrow. Before I could say more, Olivia's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. It's Rachel, she said. I'm going to step outside. She left the room, disappearing into the chilly night. 5 minutes later, she returned, looking pale, wide-eyed, her face filled with shock. She looked at me, then down at the floor, and then her eyes landed on a photo on the mantel. Without saying a word, she collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I held her tight, letting her cry, waiting for the storm to pass. After what felt like an eternity, she pulled away, wiping her eyes. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Dad, Mom's dead. My stomach dropped at her words. Rachel found her tonight, she said, her voice trembling. She took a bottle of sleeping pills. I couldn't breathe. The words didn't fully register. My mind couldn't process them. Laura was dead. The woman I had loved for 25 years, the mother of my children, the one who had betrayed me. Now, I had to prepare for her funeral. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When I was with the kids, I tried to keep my composure, but I could tell they knew I wasn't holding it together. At night, I sat in the backyard, staring at the old swing set that once echoed with the laughter of Rachel, Ethan, and Olivia, with Laura chasing them around. I looked at the azaleas we planted together when we first moved in. I remembered the good times, the picnics, the nights spent under the stars. Just knowing she was there used to make me feel safe. But now, everything felt cold and empty, and the unresolved emotions gnawed at me. The biggest question that haunted me was how much of this was my fault. I hadn't given her the pills. I hadn't forced them on her, but I had certainly contributed to the pain that led her to this. I had wanted her to hurt, just as I had. I loved her so much, and she had done the one thing that could destroy me. Maybe, in the end, she felt the same agony I felt, and it became too much for her to bear. I never wanted her to die. I just wanted her to feel what I felt. Maybe she did, and couldn't live with the consequences. But I would never know for sure. All I knew was that she had destroyed our marriage, and I had done the same to hers. We were both to blame. Lord, have mercy on our souls. Tomorrow was Laura's funeral. It would be the last time I would ever see her, and I had to hold it together. I couldn't break down in front of everyone, family, friends. I had to say goodbye without falling apart. The sound of the front door slamming broke my concentration, and a car engine peeled out of the driveway. I turned, startled, to see Rachel walking toward me. Dad, are you okay? She asked softly, sitting down next to me on the chaise. No, I replied, my voice thick with emotion. We sat in silence, the only sound the rustling of the leaves in the wind. Rachel's expression was unreadable as she finally spoke again. This wouldn't have happened if you'd just forgiven her, if you'd come home. I was stunned. What? She made a mistake, Rachel continued, her voice steady but full of blame. You've made mistakes, too. She forgave you. She said she couldn't live without you. Your pride killed her, Dad. I froze. My daughter was blaming me for her mother's death. I had done nothing wrong. I didn't have the affair. I wasn't the one lying to family and friends for months. I didn't start taking sleeping pills to escape the guilt. Rachel exhaled and turned away. Dad, tomorrow's going to be tough. After the funeral, People will be coming back here. You don't have to do anything. Ethan and Mom's friends will take care of things, Olivia said, her voice devoid of any warmth. You don't have to be here if you don't want to. I knew exactly what she meant. She didn't want me at the funeral. Was I too broken to see it? Or was something else at play? I wasn't sure, but I wasn't about to argue with her tonight. Without another word, I turned and walked inside. The next morning, I put on a suit, gathered my things from the living room, and headed upstairs. The kids were already ready, and Dad looked exhausted. Olivia adjusted my tie, the same way her mother used to do. I kissed her forehead, took her hand, and together we left for the funeral. The ride was heavy with silence. Olivia kept her head down, not a word escaping her lips, not even a glance in my direction. When we arrived, the foyer was packed with friends and family. But as we entered, everyone parted, like we were walking through a corridor of judgment. Eyes followed me, not with sympathy, but with disdain. Most of the people wouldn't even meet my gaze. I nodded to an old friend, but he turned away without a word. My boss gave me a stiff handshake, offering his condolences, but his eyes spoke volumes, cold, calculating judgment. His inner circle mirrored the look, all of them thinking the same thing. The kids received some sympathy, but not me. Not a single person cared for me. Olivia led me to the casket, and we knelt to pay our respects. The whispers were relentless, cutting through the air like knives. Heartless fool left her, someone muttered. He caused this, another voice sneered. Hypocrite, a third whispered. Olivia squeezed my hand, her grip firm. She had heard it too. The preacher spoke comforting words, and one of Laura's oldest friends sang a hymn, one Laura had always loved. When it ended, the singer shook hands with Rachel and Ethan but passed us by, ignoring Olivia and me completely. Then the preacher opened the floor for anyone who wanted to speak. Several people stepped up. Rachel was the last. She spoke about forgiveness, how Jesus forgave those who nailed him to the cross, and how we should do the same. I sat there, my heart turning cold, as it hit me like a punch in the gut. They had made me the villain. At the gravesite, the wind bit at us, sharp and unforgiving. The preacher offered his final words, and we all stood there in silence. Afterward, he handed each of us a red rose to place on the casket. I went first, then Olivia, followed by Rachel and Ethan. An old family friend in a wheelchair slowly rolled up to say his goodbyes. It was one of the hardest moments of my life, but it wasn't over yet. Before Rachel and Ethan could walk away, I stopped them, my voice low and steady but cutting. I see what you've done, I said. I see the lies you've spread. Because of you too, everyone's turned against me. You're dead to me. Their eyes widened, disbelief painted on their faces. Just like the woman we buried today, I added, stepping closer. My voice was calm, but the weight of my words hit hard. Don't speak to me again. Don't call. Don't visit. From now on, I'm no longer your father. I turned to the small crowd of former friends gathered around us. This goes for all of you too, I said, my voice carrying. They stood frozen, speechless. Without another word, I took Olivia's hand and walked back to the limousine. After settling Dad in, I told the driver to leave without looking back. Rachel and Ethan stood there, still processing what had just happened. The only people who came to my wake were my boss, his wife, and two old friends from the neighborhood. Olivia, of course, was there. Rachel and Ethan held their own gathering, receiving condolences from their circle. Olivia later told me that everyone believed I had pushed Laura to her end. They thought I had abandoned her over a small mistake, that my coldness had driven her to self-destruction. In their eyes, I was the one who had ruined her. Olivia returned to college, and I was left alone. No friends, no family, just the emptiness that filled the house. Rachel stayed with her husband, and Ethan, off at school, kept to himself. In the summer, he kept busy with his own life. I threw myself into work, hoping it would numb the pain, but it was easier said than done. A few times a week, I woke in the middle of the night expecting Laura to be beside me. Some nights, I saw her face with Henry Wallace at the Holiday Inn. She had confessed in her letter that he was our old neighbor. He and his wife had moved away 2 years ago. Time passed, but the pain never fully faded. Rachel had a daughter, whom she named Laura, and a year later, a son named Chance after her husband's father. I never met my grandchildren. Ethan married his college sweetheart, but I didn't attend the wedding. 2 years later, she filed for divorce. He had cheated on her, just like his mother had cheated on me. He moved to California, and I haven't seen him since the funeral. I only knew about their lives because Olivia would drop pieces of information, hoping it would soften me. She wanted me to stay informed, to remind me that they were still my children. My best friend became my boss. He was there when I needed to talk, and he gave me the time I needed to get back on my feet. Early on, he said, "I'll give you a year to get yourself together. After that, I'll have to replace you." That speech kept me going. I threw myself into work and quickly climbed to the top of the company. For years later, I was offered a senior role in Florida. In just 3 months, I sold my house, downsized to a smaller place in Orlando, and took on operations for the entire eastern U.S. I lost most of my friends in Maryland. Only a few people still spoke to me, and even fewer reached out. Nearly everyone had turned their backs on me. I had become a stranger, an outcast. Olivia graduated with honors and landed a job at one of Florida's largest entertainment venues. She moved in with me until she found her own place. "Hopefully that won't be too soon," I joked. She laughed, but I knew the truth. Eventually, she'd move on. Dad passed away just a year after Laura. It had been 5 years since everything had changed, and I found myself with nothing left except Olivia. She had her own life to build now, and so did I. If I didn't figure it out, I'd end up an old man, alone, with only my golden retrievers for company. Pathetic, right? I needed something to focus on. I'd always had a love for writing. Years of corporate work had only seen me write reports, but as the routine grew more tedious, I found myself drifting back into short stories. To my surprise, I sold a few to a local literary magazine. One weekend, with Olivia out, I started drafting what I thought would be just another short story. But before long, I was outlining something much more personal, something much bigger than I had expected. I hesitated for days. Writing it meant revisiting all those painful memories. But one evening, after a long pause, I sat down and began. For months later, the first draft was done. It was raw, but I didn't want anyone to see it. I boxed it up and placed it on a shelf in my office, out of sight. The act of writing had been freeing. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. I enrolled in a creative writing class at a nearby college to improve my skills. The class was mostly made up of young adults who didn't know the difference between an adverb and an adjective. There were only 2 others near my age, and we quickly formed a small group to show the younger crowd the ropes. George was retired and working on a book about his family's role in the Civil War. Diana, a widow, had raised 5 kids and moved to Florida after they left. She had used her late husband's insurance money to start fresh. As we spoke more, we found that we had a surprising amount in common. I had come to realize that the key to dating, especially after so many years, was to really listen. I hadn't been on a date in nearly 30 years, so I focused on every word Diana said. One day, she stopped mid-sentence, suddenly realizing she had been doing all the talking. "You know," she said, tilting her head, "I've told you everything about me, but I don't know anything about you. Where are you from? Why are you living alone in Florida? And why on earth are you taking a creative writing class?" I hesitated for a moment before giving her a condensed version of my life story. When I finished, I tried to steer the conversation back toward her, but she wouldn't let me. She kept asking questions until I finally gave in. "My story's complicated," I said, my voice a little strained. "If you really want to know, come to my place for dinner next Saturday." Her smile, the biggest one I'd seen in ages, lit up her face. "I'd love to." Dinner went well, and afterward, we moved outside to relax under the stars beneath one of my palm trees. Diana turned to me with a smile that seemed to say she had more to say. "That was fantastic, Daniel," she said. "I know very few men who can cook lasagna, much less do it as well as you. What other surprises do you have?" I grinned. "You already know most of it. I run a distribution center for Folks Industries. My daughter, Olivia, lives with me. My wife passed 5 years ago. I have 2 other children, and you've met my golden retrievers, Bo and Luke. That's it. I'm just a regular guy." "Well," Diana replied, curiosity piqued, "you promised to tell me your story, and I'm still waiting for the juicy details." Instead of answering her, I went inside and returned with the box containing my novel, my story, the most painful chapter of my life. "I've been writing for a long time," I said, placing the box between us. "Sold a few short stories to a local magazine. But before I took this class, I wrote something deeply personal. It's all in here. I'm not sure what to do with it, but it helped me deal with my wife's death and the way my family fell apart. I've never shown it to anyone. I'd really appreciate your thoughts on it." Diana looked at me with a sense of admiration. "I'd be happy to read it." What's it called? Fairweather Friends, I replied. She raised an eyebrow. 987 pages, she asked, genuinely impressed. You're not joking around, are you? I nodded. I want your honest opinion. Don't hold back. I'm not going to show it to my daughter. She lived through all of it, and I don't want to stir up old wounds. Don't worry, Diana said with a grin. I'll give you my honest feedback. I'll start reading tomorrow. We spent the rest of the evening talking about writing, Florida nightlife, and our favorite movies. It was a good night. When I walked her to her car, she kissed me on the cheek. It felt like I was 18 again. The next class, Diana didn't show up. I hadn't heard from her since our dinner, and I started to wonder if I had made a mistake. Was I coming on too strong? Had I made her uncomfortable? 2 weeks later, I got a message from her on my answering machine. Hi, Daniel. It's Diana. I'd like you to come over for dinner this Friday. My son is in town, and I'd like you to meet him. Also, there might be a surprise waiting for you, so bring some of that great white wine we had the other night. Be here at 7. Call me back. Bye. On Friday evening, I dressed casually but made an effort. I brought 2 bottles of Balthazar Residential Riesling Cabernet, Hattenheimer Schützenhaus 2012. I had read in an Orlando magazine that it was one of the best white wines of the year, so I decided to trust their recommendation. I hoped it would pair well with whatever Diana had planned for dinner. Hey, Daniel, come in. Diana greeted me warmly as I arrived, showing me around her home. Outside, a small table was set for 3, with candles and wine glasses. A man emerged from behind 2 orange trees, walking toward the table. Daniel, this is my son, Lucas. Lucas, meet Daniel Carter. Nice to meet you, Lucas said, shaking my hand. Mom's told me a lot of good things about you. She's hard to impress, so that means a lot. Nice to meet you too, Lucas. But whatever she said, it was probably just something from our creative writing class. I gave a light-hearted shrug. Nothing exciting about me. Diana flashed me a warm smile and gestured toward the table. After placing the wine in the fridge to chill, she sat down and took my hand in hers. Daniel, she began, her tone a little more serious now. I invited you here under somewhat false pretenses. We'll eat once the wine's ready, but before that, I have some unexpected news to share. I think you'll be surprised, hopefully in a good way. A knot tightened in my stomach, but my curiosity was piqued. Diana, what's going on? I asked, unsure whether to be concerned or intrigued. She exhaled deeply, looking a little nervous but resolute. Daniel, my son is here because I did something I wasn't sure you'd approve of if I'd asked you first. But now it's done. If you're upset, I understand. I raised an eyebrow, sensing something significant was coming. What did you do? Diana took a breath and continued, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. I read your book in 2 days. I couldn't put it down, she said. It was heartbreaking, but also inspiring. I cried when you wrote about going to live with your father after your wife passed, and again when you spoke about your kids. She looked at me, her eyes soft. Daniel, your book is the best I've ever read. I had to share it with Lucas. He's not the type to read books by unknown authors, but he made an exception for me. He liked it too. I sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb what she was saying. Lucas wants to help you get it published, Diana added. Lucas nodded, speaking up. Mom's right. This is one of the best first novels I've ever read, and I've read a lot. I work at Prentice Press in New York as the assistant chief for author submissions. We get hundreds of manuscripts a month, and I personally review them. If they pass, we help with edits and publishing. We want to publish your book. I could barely process what they were saying. We'll discuss the details after dinner, Lucas continued. But for now, congratulations. This is a huge breakthrough. I was in complete shock, my mind racing. Diana's beaming smile told me she was enjoying the moment, watching my stunned reaction. After a long pause, she kissed my forehead and excused herself to bring out the meal. During dinner, we talked more about the book. Diana was clearly moved by certain chapters, and I found myself getting emotional as well. We enjoyed Diana's steamed Dorado, and by the time we finished with peach pie for dessert, Lucas explained the publishing process in greater detail, the royalties, the next steps, everything. I'm not going to get rich off it, I laughed softly. No, but you're telling a story that matters, Lucas said, his expression serious. And that's what counts. By the time he excused himself for the night, my head was spinning. Diana poured the last of the wine, and we sat outside, discussing what life might be like if my book were to become a success. I know I'm no Stephen King, I joked. Not yet, she teased with a wink. It was well past midnight when I finally decided it was time to go. As Diana walked me to my car, she surprised me with a kiss, a lingering, deep kiss that reminded me I was still very much alive, even at 55. For the next 3 months, I worked closely with one of the editors at Prentice Press, polishing the manuscript. Most of our communication was through email and phone calls, but we did meet in person once. The first challenge was transferring the manuscript from Word to their editing software, which was more suited for revisions than new material. Once the edits were completed, I spent an entire weekend poring over printed proof sheets, making adjustments and fine-tuning. No matter how many times I read it, there was always something I wanted to improve. My editor had warned me it would be like this, and she was right. During the day, I worked at Folks Industries. At night, I was fully immersed in the book. Olivia was thrilled about my progress. "You're not reading it until I get the first published copy in my hands," I told her. Olivia made sure I stayed healthy, reminding me to exercise and watch the news each night, keeping me grounded. "Diana only visited on weekends. I don't want to drain your creativity," she would joke. We spent those weekends talking about everything under the sun. No subject was off limits. I don't think any therapist could have helped me as much as Diana did. The more I opened up about my past, the lighter I felt. I could never forget what Laura had done to me, or what I had done to her, but now I could see that we were both at fault. That realization was freeing. Our connection deepened. The day I sent the final draft to Prentice Press, Diana stayed the night to celebrate with me. We celebrated over and over. When Olivia came home briefly, she noticed I had company and quickly decided to stay with her boyfriend. Diana gave me a new perspective on life. My book officially released on May 1st, and several book signings were scheduled, including one in Ellicott City, my old hometown in Maryland. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. I took 3 weeks off from work to go on the book tour. Many people imagine the life of an author to be glamorous, full of red carpets and leisure. But the reality? It was far from it. For 28 days, I hopped between planes, trains, and countless hotel rooms, never unpacking. I attended book signings and met readers who told me my book had changed their lives. The best part of the tour was connecting with those readers. But the constant travel and never-ending signing sessions began to wear me down. Twice during the tour, Diana surprised me at my signings. She'd stand in line, just like any other reader, and it made the exhausting routine feel worthwhile. She played coy, and I played the part of the famous author, pretending to woo her in front of the crowd. It was an enjoyable time, but when the event ended, Diana stayed behind, helping me relax in the most comforting way. Each time she left, though, I felt an emptiness creep in. Phone calls helped ease the distance, but they weren't the same as having her close in my arms. I realized I was feeling something genuine, something I hadn't experienced in years, and I couldn't help but hope she felt it too. The final stop of my tour brought me back to my hometown. I had requested this location specifically, and Prentice Press had agreed. The bookstore was just a few miles from where I had lived for most of my life. When I arrived, I was greeted by a long line already snaking outside. A table was set with dozens of copies of my book, along with a large poster featuring my photo. As I scanned the crowd, I noticed some familiar faces. First in line were my old boss and his wife. I walked up to them and immediately gave them both a warm hug. We exchanged contact details, and my boss said, "You have to visit us sometime." "I promise," I replied, smiling from ear to ear. It took a moment to realize that the line behind them was growing, but I focused on the task at hand. The signing was smooth. I greeted every person, signed their books, posed for photos, and genuinely enjoyed the whole experience. Then, about 30 minutes in, an old acquaintance stepped up. I recognized him immediately. He was one of the people at Laura's funeral who had avoided eye contact and refused to speak to me. I signed his book, added a brief note, and smiled as we shook hands. But then he said something that took me by surprise. "I'm really sorry for how I treated you. I didn't fully understand until I read your book." I stood there, completely caught off guard, as he turned and left without another word. As the day went on, several others from my past came forward to apologize, expressing regret for judging me without knowing the whole story. I felt uneasy with the deluge of remorse, but it was hard to ignore their sincerity. The most surreal moment of the day came when Charlotte Wallace approached with a copy of my book. She seemed awkward, unsure of how to begin. "It's unfortunate we're meeting again like this," she said, before continuing, "but I wanted to apologize for everything. I was taken aback. She went on, I can't apologize enough for what Henry did to you. But if it helps, I kicked him out after Laura passed. We've been divorced for 4 years now, and I'm engaged to someone else. She hesitated, then added, oh, and just so you know, there were rumors going around town that you were planning revenge on Henry. He must have heard them because he quit his job and moved to Saudi Arabia for work. I haven't seen him since. I frowned, still processing her words. Then she admitted, I started that rumor. We stood in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of what she just said. She handed me the book, and I signed it with a message. Charlotte, a friend, not just in fair weather. I hope some of my words help you find your own liberation, just as I found mine. Thanks for listening. I walked around the table and embraced her. By the time the event was officially supposed to end, the line still hadn't shrunk. I looked up and saw Rachel standing by the bookshelves, staring at me but not approaching. She looked like she was searching for something, but when I looked again, she was gone. Olivia was the last in line. After our hug, we walked to my car, talking casually about everything and nothing. As we drove toward the hotel, Olivia brought up Diana. I like her, Olivia said, eyeing me closely. I hope you do too. I hesitated for a second before admitting, I think I'm in love with her. Without warning, Olivia pulled me into a tight hug and started crying. Just then, a police car pulled up, and the officer stepped out, knocking on the window. It was Sergeant Jason. We exchanged laughs and caught up as if we were old friends. I told him about the book and my return to town. I haven't read it yet, Jason admitted. I handed him a copy and signed it. To Jason, you changed my life. No hard feelings. Someone had to do it. Jason chuckled, then left for a call. Olivia and I went to dinner afterward. Returning home wasn't as overwhelming as I had imagined, but when I saw Rachel standing outside my door, I was taken off guard. Diana and I had just finished breakfast, discussing the latest bestsellers, when I noticed her. Hi, Dad, Rachel said awkwardly. How are you? I took a deep breath. I'm fine. What brings you here? Rachel shifted nervously. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. I raised an eyebrow. Rachel, this neighborhood is 900 miles from yours. That doesn't seem like a coincidence. Before she could respond, Diana appeared behind me. Would you like to introduce us, Daniel? She said firmly. I exhaled and introduced them. Diana, this is my daughter, Rachel. Without hesitation, Diana stepped forward and embraced Rachel warmly. Come on in, Diana said. I've heard so much about you. The two of them walked into the living room, chatting away nonstop. I was left to do the household chores. A few times as I passed the living room, I heard their laughter. Diana oohed and awed as Rachel showed her pictures of her children. Then Diana called out, Honey, come join us. Her tone was playful but authoritative, and there was no room for argument. I sighed, dried my hands, and joined them in the living room, sitting next to Diana. She immediately took my hand, not just affectionately, but as if she wanted to anchor me. Rachel glanced at our hands, her expression unreadable. The silence between us was heavy, but Diana broke it with a determined voice. Okay, since neither of you are going to speak, I will, she said, her voice firm, almost hoarse. Daniel, I invited Rachel here because she needs to talk to you. I knew you wouldn't invite her, so I did it for you. I know I'm just a guest in your house, she added, squeezing my hand. But if you want me to stay, you're going to listen to her. I shifted uncomfortably between Diana and Rachel, feeling cornered. I didn't want to cause another conflict, so I leaned back, took a deep breath, and waited. Rachel hesitated, her voice quiet and unsure. Dad, I came here to see how you're doing, and to apologize. I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue, unsure of where this was going. Rachel's voice cracked as she spoke, each word heavy with emotion. I was wrong about so many things, Dad. I blamed you for everything. What happened with Mom, with Ethan, and with me. I never really understood what was going on. She paused, clearly struggling. But after reading your book, I finally got it. I saw things from your side. Her voice cracked again, her emotions spilling over. I feel so stupid for not realizing how much you were hurting. I never thought of you as having feelings. She paused, wiping her eyes. When we were kids, you were always the strong one. The one who didn't show any emotion. The one who seemed like everything was fine. But now I see it wasn't like that at all. She took a deep breath, her voice faltering but determined. You used that strength to protect us, to protect yourself. Mom broke through that, and I had no idea how much she hurt you. Rachel looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. I thought if you just forgave her, if you came back, things would go back to normal. I didn't realize that you were being strong in a way I didn't understand. Strong enough to walk away from someone you loved for so long, just so we could be safe. She wiped a tear away, her gaze never leaving mine. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry I didn't see it before. I turned my back on you. I blamed you. After Mom died, I told everyone she died because of you. Her voice faltered. I was wrong. I see it now. I understand. She straightened up and took a steadying breath. I'm trying to make things right. I bought copies of your book and gave them to Mom's friends. I told them they were wrong about you, that you weren't the villain they thought you were. I told them how much you suffered, and how I never understood it. Rachel wiped another tear. I saw you at the book signing. I wanted to come up and hug you, but I didn't have the courage. I was too ashamed. She sniffled, fighting to keep her composure. I'm here to apologize, and to ask if you'll be part of my life again. It's been more than 5 years. I have 2 beautiful kids now, Dad. I want you to be in their lives. I want you to be my dad again. Please. I love you. With that, Rachel lowered her head, overwhelmed by her emotions, and sobbed. A wave of guilt hit me hard, and when I glanced at Diana, I saw her watching me closely, waiting for my response. I wasn't ready to decide yet, so I stalled. What about Ethan? How does he feel about this? Does he know you're here? Rachel snorted, her frustration clear. Ethan's a mess. He's still bitter, but he hides it. After Lori left him, he moved to California, hopping from girlfriend to girlfriend. He doesn't even know I'm here, and honestly, I don't care what he thinks. Her words gave me a moment to think, but I still wasn't ready to respond. I needed more time, so I asked, Rachel, what are your plans? Are you staying here for a while? I'm staying with Olivia for a couple of days, she replied. She wanted me to see her new place before I head back home. I nodded. I'll think about what you've said, and I'll let you know what I decide. Rachel exhaled, relief mixed with her continued sorrow. That's more than I expected. Thanks, Dad. She stood, smoothing out her jeans. I'll go to Olivia's now. Diana, it was nice to meet you. I hope we see each other again. She hesitated before adding, take care of my dad. And just like that, she was gone. I had so much to process, but this time, Diana was there by my side. She wouldn't let me rush into anything. Later that night, when I was alone, I let myself feel everything. I didn't want Diana to see me cry, but I had to let it out. When Diana and I returned from our Caribbean cruise, a gift from Prentice Press for Fairweather Friends hitting #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, we flew straight to Maryland. It was my first time meeting my grandchildren, now 2 and 4 years old, and also introducing Diana to my hometown. We revisited old spots, but more importantly, Rachel and I began to create new memories. Diana, experienced as a grandmother, gave me tips on how to handle the inevitable awkward moments. But the best moment came during dinner with Rachel's family. As we sat around the table, Diana and I exchanged a brief look. She gave me a small nod, and I cleared my throat. Rachel, Olivia, I said, my voice steady. We have something to tell you. Rachel put down her fork, her eyes wide. We're getting married, I said with a smile. There was a brief silence, and then Olivia screamed, leaping across the table to embrace us both. We've already started planning, she cried with excitement. Diana and I laughed. Of course you have, Diana teased. We decided on the cruise, but we wanted Rachel to be the first to know. Soon, we'd be sharing the news with Diana's children as well. We were happy, really happy. After so many years of believing our paths were set, that we were stuck, we had found something unexpected. When we were younger, we thought love was always meant to be perfect and forever. But life had shown us otherwise. This wasn't a fairy tale, and it wasn't flawless, but it was our story. I had been happy with Laura for 25 years, and I hoped to be just as happy with Diana for the next 25. Maybe, just maybe, I'd write another book about it.